Welcome back everyone to the Brexit webinar series organised by Universities UK International and the UK Government Science and Innovation Network. Here we aim to keep you up to date on all the latest developments in Brexit and what the consequences are for European and UK higher education and research sectors. For those who have been following us, you know we did approximately one webinar every 2 or 3 months in the previous academic year, and the last one was in last May, where we concluded at that point that we basically discussed everything that needed to be discussed and that we would come back in the future if that was needed. Well, I think it's safe to say that a lot has happened over the summer, a lot of developments, and that is why we decided to start the webinar series again and update you with all the things that have happened. As always, slides will be sent to you after the webinar and also a link to the recording of the webinar, may you want to see it again. So for everyone wanting for slides, don't worry, they will come your way. Let me just check because yes, there we go. I'm Anna Janse, I'm Head of European Engagement at Universities UK International, and with me today is Francis Wood, who is Regional Director of the UK Science and Innovation Network Europe, and Gosia Gzek, who is European Advisor at the UK Research Office in Brussels. Gosia will join us for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so as always, please do send your questions in and we'll pick them up at the end. We sometimes get a lot of questions, so don't worry if we're not able to answer your questions during the webinar. We'll pick them up offline and get back to you via email. Today we'll give you an update on the political developments and the possible timeline we are looking at right now. Francis will go into the latest information on Horizon 2020 and an immigration update, and I will address Erasmus Plus, qualification recognition, student fees, data protection, and transnational education. So as you all know, the original deadline was the 29th of March of this year, but the deal was not ratified by the UK government, or the UK Parliament, I should say. Theresa May then asked for an extension to the EU, and this extension was given up until the 31st of October. After that, in May, she resigned as Prime Minister, and at the end of July, Boris Johnson won the Tory leadership election, making him the next Prime Minister. And Boris Johnson made it quite clear from the start that he intends to leave the EU with or without a deal on the 31st of October, and of course that has led to us wanting to make sure that our members are still prepared for a no-deal exit. As a result of the new government, we wrote a short briefing that basically outlined the risk to our sector of a no-deal exit for our university and what kind of policies need to be in place in order to make sure that there won't be any damaging effects to our universities. We distributed this briefing to number 10 relevant cabinet ministers, but also wider key stakeholders. You can find the briefing online on our website if you like, but we also included in the link, I think the second to last slide is a slide full of links of information for you guys to explore, and the briefing is part of those links as well. So have a look at that if you like. The last couple of weeks have been a whirlwind of political developments, I think it's safe to say, and the update I am giving you here today might very well be out of date by tomorrow, but I did want to give you a little bit of overview of where we are right now and what we know at the moment. So the UK Parliament has passed a law that is designed to stop a no-deal exit, including a possible extension until the 31st of January of 2020. 21 Conservative MPs voted for this bill, which resulted into them being expelled from the Conservative Party, and Johnson lost his majority in the House of Commons. Now, in the summer, when the Parliament was in recess, it was in August that Boris Johnson had announced that he wanted to prorogue or suspend Parliament not long after it came back in September for a month up until the 14th of October. But this is being challenged in the UK courts, and we are expecting to hear more about what that will mean and what will happen later on in this week. The Prime Minister said that the suspension of Parliament was necessary to make way for a new Queen's Speech. A new Queen's Speech sets out the government's legislative agenda and marks the beginning of a new parliamentary session. So normally speaking, by convention, a new Queen's speech happens every year, and Parliament is prorogued just before a new Queen's speech. Boris Johnson, after the bill being passed, did ask for an early election. However, he doesn't have majority anymore, and the opposition didn't want to give him an early election unless they were sure that a no-deal exit was off the table. So he wasn't able to get an early election. A couple of dates that are important. The 17th and 18th of October is when the next European Council Summit happens. EU leaders have said leading up to that Council Summit that if the UK and the EU are able to come to some sort of possible solution, the EU leaders would need a couple of days to look it over before they give a final okay. And Michel Barnier has also said, if the UK leaves without a deal, then a transition period wouldn't exist anymore effectively. But he was also quite stringent on that mini deals wouldn't be possible. Then on the 19th of October, this is an important date because as it stands at the moment, it is the deadline to get a deal through the House of Commons. And on the 21st and 22nd of October is an important date because that is a possibility for a vote of no confidence. However, even if this is triggered and would lead to an election, there always is 5 weeks in between a vote of no confidence and an election. So this would push us past the 31st of October deadline. So as you can see, there isn't much wiggle room in the timeline for the political process to happen to enable us to leave with a deal. But my experience is that when there is political will, a lot can suddenly happen. So we are still hoping very much for a positive outcome, leaving with a deal, and that will be agreed by the end of the month. But in case it isn't, we still feel it's very important for our universities, but also universities across Europe, to prepare for a no-deal exit. So just to recap, possible outcomes by the 31st of October. So we do have a deal on or just before the 31st of October. We don't have a deal, but that is because the EU and the UK can't come to a new agreement, or the UK is unable to find a solution that passes through Parliament, or an extension of Article 50, referring to the bill that has been passed. The UK would ask for more time, and then the extension would be, at least the bill proposes, the 31st of January 2020, bearing in mind that this is something the EU would have to agree on as well. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Frances, who will walk you through the latest developments for Horizon 2020.
Thank you very much, Anna-Mai. So just to say at the beginning that the UK government is doing lots of planning for all scenarios, so both deal and no deal. I will cover Horizon 2020 recap, but quite a lot of this has already been covered in previous webinars, and also there is a lot of detail on gov.uk if you wish to have more information. I will spend most of the time talking about recent announcements that have been made over the summer. So just quickly on the recap. The extension until the 31st of October means that during this period, or if, as Anna-Mai says, there is a further extension until the UK leaves the EU, the UK will continue to participate in Horizon 2020 as a member state. Should the UK leave without a deal, then the UK government underwrite guarantee covers all Horizon 2020 funding for successful UK bids submitted before the date of exit, even if those applications are notified after exit in terms of whether they've been successful, and funding is available for the lifetime of the projects. However, there is a period after exit where the UK can still participate in Horizon 2020 projects, but they can only participate in projects where they're eligible to do so as a third country, and those projects can be submitted any time after the date that the UK leaves the EU until the end of 2020, and if those projects are successful, they will be funded for the lifetime of the project. So I think here the really important point to bring out is that in the scenario without a deal after exit, it's the UK will be a third country. So if a project requires a minimum number of member states to participate, and the UK was that before, but isn't after exit. That means an additional partner from another member state will need to be found in order for that project to be eligible. Next slide, please. So the new thing that was announcsked over the summer is Manu Bennett beneficiary schemes. So these are the schemes such as the European Research Council, the Mary Skłodowska-Curie Actions, and the SME Instrument. And so there is a separate pot of funding that is available in the scenario of a no-deal Brexit where the Commission chooses not to evaluate UK bids any further. So this pot of money will essentially be available and is a safety net for UK participants. So this means that if you're considering putting in a bid to one of these schemes, please make sure that you do so before the UK leaves the EU, because then it will be considered under this scheme. So I think, just to reiterate, it's really important that this is a safety net scheme. So the Commission has not yet decided what they will do in the event of a no deal, whether they will continue to assess UK bids or not. So they may continue to assess bids, in which case the UK underwrite guarantee will apply. So bids that are deemed successful by the Commission will then be funded by the UK government under the underwrite guarantee. But in a scenario where the Commission chooses not to continue assessing because the UK has become a third country, UKRI will then take over the assessment of those projects, and for those that are successful will be funded under this scheme. It's really important here to also emphasise that this is a separate pot of money. So this money will not come from existing UKRI funding and will not sort of take away from sort of broader UK funding that is already available. So this is a sort of new pot of money. And I think that's everything on this one. So back to you, Anna-Mai.
Thanks, Frances. We'll come back to you in a moment with more on immigration, but for now, let's start talking about Erasmus. As you may remember, for those who saw the previous webinar, at that point, the UK government guaranteed guidance on Erasmus kind of described two different scenarios in a no-deal situation. First, you would have a no deal, and then the UK government would try and negotiate access to Erasmus Plus. And then if that was successful, they would use the guarantee to fund that participation. Or in a no deal, the UK government wasn't able to negotiate access to Erasmus Plus, and then the guarantee would only cover those bids already ratified or agreed, basically. Now, the language on the website of the government has changed a bit, and they're not specifically referring to negotiating access to Erasmus in a no-deal situation. And the way the wording of the guarantee is now is that it will cover funding for successful Erasmus Plus bids if the UK leaves the EU without deal. Now, that doesn't preclude the government trying to negotiate access to the programme, but we don't know why that wording changed, basically. As the guarantee stands now, it means that in a no-deal situation where we don't have access to Erasmus Plus, the government guarantee would only cover successful bids, so only everything covered before the 31st of October of this year. This does not include any new mobilities, but we are very actively working with government on what the sector would need in case of a no-deal exit and no access to Erasmus, not only on the short term, but also on the long term. It's important to note that the European Commission has offered the UK the ability to pay into the EU budget for the remainder of the current cycle, which would run up until the end of 2020. And if the UK government chose to do that in case of a no deal, then we would still remain full access to Erasmus Plus, Horizon 2020 and other European programs. Another update is that the Department for Education has confirmed that the underwrite will cover incoming and outgoing student and staff Erasmus non-European mobility, so Key Action 107, and youth mobility, so Key Action 105. So for those working with Erasmus Plus, the information on this slide must be very familiar to you. I just wanted to clarify a few points because we do get a lot of questions about how to apply for the guarantee and what the process is. So based on those questions, I just made a couple of points that I wanted to highlight during the webinar. There's currently no deadline for registering projects on the portal. DfE have said that the platform at the moment is only for registered projects, but if along the lines you have new approved projects, you can go onto the portal and upload these as well. Having said that, it is worthwhile considering, if you don't already want to upload projects, if you have an upcoming second payment due. Because if we do leave without a deal quite suddenly and you already have this uploaded, then you'll minimize the chances of disruption in money flow. Multiple forms on the portal can be submitted. So if the current form that is up there, the one that you have there, isn't enough, doesn't have enough room or space for all your partnership, you can just download a second version of it and upload that as well. But do be mindful that this form is linked to individuals and not to institutions. So you can have a situation where multiple people from one institution submit claims, but then don't have an overview of all the things that have and haven't been claimed. So our advice is really to have one person manage all the claims from a university so that you have that overview. DfE has updated its Erasmus FAQs, acknowledging that the European Commission has given the UK national agency the delegated authority to approve applications under the 2019 call, and also that all successful applications will be covered by the underwrite. So that really covers the 2019 call and also covers them to be part of the underwrite. Of course, it has to be also in accordance with the additional criteria of viability that the UK government maintains. So when it comes to claiming, in a no-deal situation, the system will kick in. And again, it's important that if you have payments due or receiving money due just after the 31st of October, that you claim that to make sure that you have as little as possible hiccup in the financial streams. What you need to do is complete the confirmation of continuation form, list the partners, the projects, and your grant agreement numbers. And this will need to be submitted in addition to with a letter of your head of organization saying that their bilateral agreements with your European partners can continue outside of Erasmus as well. What you don't have to do is upload signed grant agreements with each and every individual European partner you have. You just have to make a list of all the partners and have the written evidence for yourself that these partners have agreed that indeed outside of Erasmus we continue to work together. So basically an email from your European partner saying we're happy to keep working with you is enough as written evidence. For work placements, the process is pretty much the same. You have to have some sort of correspondence that your students can continue their work placements at those organizations, and then the form and everything else is the same as for study placements. Worth mentioning on work placements is that there is an issue there because work placements in a country beyond 3 months have an issue with immigration requirements. Our government is aware of this and we are hoping to get some answers on this quite soon. Of course, we continue to tell our universities that to reach out to their European partners. We continue to tell European partners to reach out to their UK partners to make sure that you make allowances for a no-deal situation and that you can continue outside of Erasmus. On the European side, the European Commission extended its no-deal contingency measure, so that means that also on the date of exit now, so the 31st of October, anyone who is mobile at the date of exit, so staff and students, will be able to continue their placement abroad and continue it without interruption and will continue to get Erasmus Plus funding. This covers Key Action 103, 107, and since recently we know this also covers Erasmus Mundus scholarship holders who started their scholarship before the 31st of October. They will be able to complete their full programs, including any planned future stay in the UK. Another thing that we wanted to address is that we have heard from a number of our members of our universities that universities in Europe have been telling them that they would either not receive UK students on Erasmus placements or not send their students to the UK on Erasmus placements, and that they cited Brexit and the uncertainties around Brexit as a reason to do that. We just wanted to flag that Although understandable, it's not allowed. The European Commission has circulated a letter to the national agencies in Europe that manage Erasmus Plus, in which it basically says that as long as the UK is still a full member state, as we are right now, we have the full rights under the Erasmus programme, and that Brexit cannot be cited as a justification for cancelling current or planned mobilities with or to the UK. The letter emphasises the contingency measures in place for those people who are mobile at the date of exit should we leave without a deal. And we have circulated this letter to our members and our European partners, but we'll continue to put this letter to the attention of our partners. Now, for the latest issues on migration, I'm handing back to you, Frances.
Thank you very much. So again, I will go quite quickly through what I think is very familiar to everybody, and I'll focus the most on some of the new announcements that were made over the summer. So just quickly on the sort of update. So in a deal scenario, there's no change to the immigration status of EU citizens who are already here or who arrive before the 31st of December 2020. EU nationals who already live in the UK or who arrive by this date will be able to apply for either settled status or pre-settled status. So settled status will enable EU nationals having lived in the UK for at least 5 years to continue to live, work and study in the UK for as long as they like. EU nationals having lived in the UK for less than 5 years will be able to apply for pre-settled status, which will allow them to meet the 5-year residency requirement needed to apply for settled status. The settlement scheme deadline for applications will be June 2021. A new immigration system in which EU citizens will be included will be operational from January 2021 onwards. And in a no-deal scenario for EU citizens who are already in the UK before the date of exit, whether that is the 31st of October or if there is an extension, the EU settlement scheme will continue to be implemented. And if they intend to stay in the UK past the 31st of December 2020, then they will need to apply for settled or pre-settled status. And again, in a no-deal scenario for EU citizens arriving after the 31st of October or the date of exit, if that's extended, the EU settlement scheme will not apply. So there will be a transitional period until 2021 when European Economic Area citizens and their family members, including Swiss, will be able to come to the UK for up to 3 months. EU citizens and family members who move to the UK after date of exit and wish to stay beyond 2020 will need to apply for UK immigration status, granting them permission to stay. And this will be called the European Temporary Leave to Remain, so Euro TLR scheme. And this will provide a route for European citizens to be able to stay for 36 months in the UK. And this will be a relatively sort of straightforward process. I know that there have been questions about 36 months not being sufficient, and there was a news article with the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, yesterday saying that a solution would be found in a no-deal scenario for students that need to stay longer than 36 months. That the detail of that has not yet been agreed, but to say that again, we have heard the questions that a lot of degrees are longer than 36 months, and that is something in terms of how we solve that is being considered within government. So now looking to the new announcements that have been made over the summer. So visas for researchers, and just to say that this changes to the Tier 1 Exceptional Talent Scheme will apply globally and not just to those in Europe. So this new fast-track visa route will be for STEM-related professions, and this will be launched later this year. I think some of you will be aware that there is also, the government has requested the Migration Advisory Committee to look into an Australian-style points-based system. So just to say that this scheme is separate from that, and will continue whatever happens on a kind of points-based system that comes into the future. And so I think a couple of things to sort of bring out in terms of how this new scheme will likely work is that there won't be a cap, so that's a change from the current system. It will expand the pool of UK research institutes and universities able to endorse candidates. It will create criteria to confer automatic endorsement subject to immigration checks. It will ensure that adult dependents and partners will have full access to the UK labour market. And it won't be tied to specific employment. It will be about your exceptional talent and not about a job offer from a particular institution. There will also be an accelerated path to settlement. And one important point that's not on the slide is that there won't be a minimum salary requirement, which I think particularly for this sector is very important for early career researchers. And then the second new announcement is the visa extension for students after graduation. So this was 4 months previously and will now be 2 years. And this route, again, won't have any cap. So I think that's really important to note. And this route will be available to all international students who have completed study at an undergraduate level. The higher education provider does need to have a track record of compliance with immigration, and the student has to have a valid Tier 4 student visa at time of application. And in terms of when this will be brought in, so universities will be able to recruit on the basis that students starting in academic year 2021 will be able to benefit. So I think that's my immigration part covered, so back to you, Anna-Mai.
Thanks, Francis. Jumped the gun there a little bit. So for those who joined us previously, know that what I'm about to say about the recognition of academic qualifications, nothing new. This is part of the Bologna process. It's not an EU regulation, so that should all be fine. We do have some new information on the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, though, on MRPQ. And so, as you probably know, post-exit, the UK will no longer be part of, or the directive that governs MRPQ will no longer apply to the UK, meaning that students studying for qualifications that are at the moment mutually recognised under that directive, they cannot get that qualification recognised in that same way anymore. The UK government website says that there will be no system of mutual recognition of professional qualifications between EEA states, Switzerland and the UK. These changes will affect holders of EEA and Swiss qualifications wishing to work in the UK, including UK nationals, EEA and Swiss nationals with any non-UK qualification wishing to work in the UK, and UK nationals wishing to provide services in EEA countries or in Switzerland. There will be a new recognition system in the UK after Brexit or exit for EEA, Swiss and UK nationals who applied for recognition of their non-UK qualification under the pre-Brexit rules. The following things are important. Decision made before the exit date will remain valid. As far as possible, applications who have been submitted before the exit date but haven't been decided on the exit date, they will be treated as far as possible under the pre-exit rules, and applications for recognition decision after the exit date will fall under the new system. So for any questions on how your application will proceed, please do contact the relevant regulator. And the new system of recognition of professional qualifications will require UK regulators to recognise EEA and Swiss qualifications which are of an equivalent standard to UK qualifications. It will not, however, include certain obligations to UK regulators that exist now, such as offering compensation measures and special access in circumstances where EEA or Swiss qualifications are not of an equivalent standard to UK qualifications. Just a note, important that in a no-deal situation, the UK has reached agreement on citizen rights with the 4 EFTA countries, so Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland, and that will apply if there is a no-deal, but that also includes the mutual recognition of professional qualification. And the European Commission has said that recognition decisions made on qualifications prior to the exit, again, they will not be affected. And the Commission has some guidance on there that you might want to check, and the link of that is also in the, I think almost the last slide or the second to last slide. And for recognition decisions that have to be made after the exit date, you really have to look at the national legislation, what the national regulators say about that. But I would advise you to have a look at the country guides that the UK government had pulled together. It's on services, so it includes mutual recognition professional qualifications. Not all member states are in there, but there are very many, so I would definitely recommend you to have a look at the service guide, the country guide, sorry, if you have a question about a specific country. So quickly on student fees, on the 28th of May, the UK government confirmed that EU students starting a course in the UK for 2020-2021 will still be eligible for home fee status and continue to be eligible for financial support for the duration of their course, even in case of a no deal. And I think that is important to mention. It's even in case of a no deal. UK students wanting to study in the EU or already studying in the EU, I would say check your relevant ministry websites for the national policies on their national decisions. Then two subjects I'm going to touch upon, which we haven't really discussed at length in our previous webinars, but we know now more, so that's why we wanted to share it with you. First being data protection. If we have a deal, everything was fine and everything will continue as normal. In a no-deal situation, there won't be any change to the legal system in the UK in which UK organisations can share or transfer data to EEA organisations. So basically the EU General Data Protection Standards, GDPR, will be preserved in domestic UK law. So the government has said that you would continue to be able to send your personal data from the UK to the EU. In recognition of the unprecedented degree of alignment between the UK and the EU, the UK would, at the exit point, continue to allow free flow of personal data. The risk, however, lies for EEA organisations transferring data back to organisations in the UK. This means that in a no-deal, national EU regulatory organisation could fine in-country organisations that share data with UK organisations. So the European Commission has indicated that following the UK's departure from the EU, the UK will be treated in the same way as any other third country. So the Commission has not proposed any equivalent recognition of the UK's data protection laws as of yet, nor has it granted an exception in case of a no deal. The transfer of data from EU data controller to a UK data controller would therefore have to apply with the GDPR regulation. And in a no-deal situation, it appears at the moment that the only circumstance where personal data could flow back from an EU university to a UK university, for example, would be through an adequacy decision. And an adequacy decision is where the EU approves the data protection regime in a non-member state as adequate. And this facilitates the smooth international transfer of data. In the absence of an adequacy decision, there is really no mechanism, as far as we know, to facilitate lawful transfer if the European Commission would decide not to allow an EEA organisation to transfer data to a UK organisation. So, two bits of advice: speak to your relevant HR legal team to make sure nothing is at risk, but also really check the ICO website and the UK government's website, because they do have some advice on how to deal with this. Then the other topic is transnational education. We also haven't really discussed this in our webinars in the past, at least not at length. And I think why it's interesting because, of course, T&E will be affected by Brexit, but also because since the referendum, UK T&E delivery in Europe has increased by 8.3%, which is a lot more than the rest of the world. So just to demonstrate what the regulatory environment is which governs T&E, at the moment the Services Directive governs T&E, and of course that will no longer apply to the UK. The Services Directive helps protect the freedom of establishment and the freedom of movement of services between EEA countries. And in many EEA countries, the requirements or the regulation for third countries is very different. So this could result in additional legal and administrative barriers for UK firms, such as the requirements based on nationality and resubmitting information to national regulators. The MLPQ directive, we already discussed it. Of course, it's also applicable to T&E because, you know, the T&E receive professional recognition in these EU countries, and there are particular forms of T&E provision, for example, franchise or validation. If you've got a country where these types of T&E provision is the prevalent form of T&E, then that will be very much affected by not being able to rely on the MRPQ directive, for example. And Greece, is one of the countries that is the case. When it comes to, again, academic qualification and quality assurances should not be affected by Brexit because these are non-EU instruments. Now, the extent of the effects of a no-deal and T&E provision is likely to vary per country, but also per T&E provision type. So in principle, the protection granted by the Services Directive would cease in case of a no-deal, and this could mean that UK HE T&E providers could face restrictions on establishment by nationality, requirements to have a minimum number of locally resident staff, or authorization requirements to operate subject to local economic needs assessments, for example. In some countries, overseas campuses or foreign awarding institutions are required to operate under a license. And so to kind of minimize risks, we would really advise you to make sure that you know what the national or local requirements are for third country T&E provision. Now, I am by no means a T&E specialist, so for those interested in T&E more broadly, but also for T&E in the context of Brexit, we've got a couple of events coming up, as you can see, but you can always contact our head of T&E, which is Eduardo Ramos, and he will be very happy to answer any questions. This is the slide that I referred to earlier. It's just a couple of links with relevant information, up-to-date information, and you can have a look at these websites if you like, but I just wanted to collate everything in one place. And basically, it only leaves me to thank you for listening. We are now opening up for questions, and I'll have a look at my chat box where the questions.
Anna, could I just add one additional point, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So just on the data protection side, that the ICO website is really useful. So there is one way in which, if you have a contract in place already, you can add a standard contractual clause where essentially you say both parties will be compliant with GDPR. And for most cases that will be sufficient, but there's much more detail in the ICO website and a tool which helps kind of talk you through that. So obviously the lead will be your legal or HR department, but if you want to understand a little bit more, that is a really good website.
Wonderful, thanks. Gosia, did you want to say anything else to add to that before we start with the questions?
Thank you, Anna-May. Thank you, Francis. I think Francis has covered everything with regards to Horizon 2020, but I would like maybe just to invite those who want to have more information to our website, acro.ac UK, where we have published our two-pager, a fact sheet on Brexit, with links to all official websites on Horizon 2020 and Brexit implications in all scenarios. So Brexit with a deal and with no deal. And also just to reiterate that in case of a no deal scenario, UKRI would be a managing institution for the underwrite guarantee that Francis explained. And that also on ACRI website, you can find a section dedicated to the implementation, if needed, of the underwrite guarantee. So if you have any questions, you can also email the team at ACRI dealing with it. So other than that, as Francis mentioned, even as a third country, the UK organization will be able to participate in most of the 2020 calls, collaborative projects. So whatever happens, I would encourage you to work on your proposals and good luck with that. Happy to answer questions.
Thanks. I'll have a look at the questions. The first is, are students who start their Erasmus exchange in January covered by the government underwrite as well, or just the ones who already started in September? So it really depends on signed contracts, because you get your grant, and that's a big grant, and you've signed for that grant basically. As far as I know, they should be covered, but I double check, and I can double check with you and get back to you afterwards with our Erasmus specialist. There is, of course, a distinction between the in-flight guarantee of of the EU and the more broadly speaking guarantee of the UK government. If you just apply the rule, everything that you have that is signed, then you know what is covered. But I'll get back to you with the details. Next question. For the UK government underwrite, is a current mobility referring to a single placement, or will this cover 2 separate placements within 1 year? EA, if students take part in 2 placements within 2 separate institutions, the first is at the point of exit and the second after exit, will the funding be covered entirely by the national agency approved grant or the UK underwrite for the second placement? I'm not sure if you're referring here, making a difference between first placement maybe happening while we exit and second placement while we don't exit. But as I read your question, and if I interpret it wrong, again, happy to take this offline, is that these are placements that would already be arranged. And again, if it's part of a grant call that's already been ratified, it should be fine, because as you know, grant agreements they go longer than the 6 months of Erasmus. Institutions get grant agreements for a year or longer even. So as long as that is signed and ratified before the exit date, it should be fine, even though that might be split up into 2 mobilities. But again, just to be sure, we'll get back to you and dive into the details and get back to you on that. Let's see. Is there any guidance for pan-European non-commission funded research, either by the UK or governments? So that's a question. A while ago, pretty much a while ago, I think a year ago, I together with my colleague who works on international research, we tried to do a pull together of different type of international funded research across different countries that's not very well known. And you'd really have to look at what individuals' countries offer. Because there isn't, I mean, we have a website which collates information of the different funding opportunities, but it's by no means exhaustive. And this is really, as far in my experience, more of you don't have one portal where you can find everything. Maybe Francis, do you know anything about guidance for pan-European non-commission funded research?
As you say, I don't think there's one portal. I think UKRI website is a good place to start. So there are schemes such as the Fund for International Collaboration. And if you look at that, most of the projects that have been funded so far have been non-European, but there have been projects that are in Europe. So in the last set of announcements, there was a project in Ireland. So I think that's a good place to start. And then also, I think, as you say, the Universities UK website.
Other questions? Oh, yeah, sorry. You mentioned that the post-study work visas will be available to Tier 4 visa holders. Does it mean that EU students will be expecting to apply for Tier 4 visas going forward, or will the Euro TLR be sufficient to cover study and work post-study, bearing in mind the 36 months restriction? I'm handing that one over to you, Francis.
That is a very, very good question, and one that I will have to take away with me, because in the guidance it does say Tier 4 visas, but equally it does also say 36 months. So I will take that away and get back to you.
Yeah, okay. Next question. What will someone from the EU coming to the UK for a Marie Curie action need in terms of visas? Gosia or Francis?
I can also depend which scheme, because Marie Curie actions, in this scheme we have 4 sub-schemes. Sometimes people come as PhD students on ITN projects, sometimes they come as postdocs for individual fellowships, and sometimes they might just come on a secondment in a RISE scheme. So I think the situation might be different if whether they are a student, on a secondment, on whether they are postdoc. Yeah. So this is again, something that would need to be in line with the general immigration rules.
Yeah, so just to expand on that a little bit, so I think in a sort of deal scenario, what I outlined about sort of settlement status applies, but in a no deal scenario, you have the Euro TLR scheme, which would cover most of the Marie Curie actions because they tend to be funding for 2 years, so the 36 months would be sufficient for that.
Okay, thanks. Another question. Is it possible that post-study work will become available for master level students? Handing that over to you again, Francis.
Yes, so I think undergraduate there is a minimum. So it's open to all graduates, with the undergraduate level being the kind of minimum requirement, so would cover masters and PhD students.
Yeah. Another one on Marie Curie and ERC. If the EU choose not to evaluate, how will the evaluation be conducted? Will it be the same as the current ERC evaluation? Francis, maybe you start and then Gosia can add.
Yeah, so the plan is that it will be the same and evaluated to the same standards and peer reviewed in the same way, except it will be done by UKRI rather than the Commission.
Gosia, anything to add?
No, just that, of course, those who just submitted applications, once it comes to that, they would be contacted and the guidance would be provided. So the process will be managed by UKRI, indeed.
Okay, perfect. I've got a question asking to go further into mutual recognized qualifications, but I don't know which aspect you want, so why don't I take this offline and contact that person and we can have a chat about what it is exactly you want more information on. Another one on post-study work visas. We will be able to recruit from 2020-2021 onwards, but what about students joining us in 2019-2020? If this is only for students coming next academic year, it may mean 2019-2020 students defer. Francis?
Yeah, so again, that's a very good question. I think with any new visa regime, it does take time to implement it and make sure that the system is operational, particularly if you're expecting high numbers. So there is a kind of a minimum amount of time before you can introduce something new and make changes. But I will take that question away about whether, because of that delay, it will increase the incentive for students to defer.
Okay. Yeah, I think those were the questions up until now. Yeah, everyone, feel free to contact us. Our contact information is on the very first slide. And if by accident, I apologize if I've missed any questions, we'll take them further offline and we will get back to you as we have done previous times. So I just wanted to thank everyone for watching. I hope you found the webinar useful. A big thank you to Francis and Gosia for their valuable contributions and taking the time to join us today. We don't have a date for a new webinar yet, just because things are moving so fast, but everyone who is registered to this webinar will get an email as soon as we decide on what the best time would be for the next webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us and see you next time.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you.